Hi everyone, my name is the Novice Reader, and today is my first booktube video, so it's going to be a little awkward and it's going to be a bit strange because I'm not used to talking to a camera like this. Even looking at the camera lens right now, it's a bit off-putting and a bit strange, but nevertheless I would like to continue this because I love books, and then in my normal everyday life I don't really get the opportunity to talk about books, so this is a great opportunity for me to reach out and communicate with other people who enjoy reading. So let's get started. So today I'm going to be doing a top 10 because I thought it'd be an easy way for new potential viewers to get a better understanding of who I am and what my reading tastes are, and if that's something that you would like to engage with and something that's similar to yourself, or perhaps it might allow you to find new books that you've never heard of. But looking at my pile, I doubt that. These are kind of like quite popular books, but they're popular for a reason, aren't they? So, starting at number 10, we have Desperation by Stephen King. So, I am quite a big fan of Stephen King. As you can maybe see back here, I've got a lot of his collection. There's this shelf and the shelf below. This specific story of Stephen King, I don't know if it's that popular. It does have an adaptation, which I have seen, which is okay, but by the standards of Stephen King, adaptations can be very hit or miss, and I think Desperation as a whole isn't the best of adaptations. But the book itself is fantastic. It basically follows a small cast of characters who get stuck in this town called Desperation in the middle of the desert. I believe it's in the southern states of America. I think Nevada or Arizona. Any of my American friends can clarify that. But basically, it is about a group of individuals who get stuck in this town because a police chief or a sheriff has gone crazy. And you're not really sure why, but he keeps mentioning this thing called TAC. Not sure what that is, but as the story evolves and the story goes on, you quickly find out what is happening. And as you can imagine, it is a Stephen King novel, so there is, all the goodies that he has. He's got great character development and great character work. I think, and with the supernatural elements that he puts into this book, it is very interesting. And I don't think this is that popular of a Stephen King. I could be wrong. This edition, anyway, is not my favorite. I don't particularly like the kind of the old, I guess it's in like a 90s look. I prefer the more modern Hodder collection, which I have got quite a few there. I think their covers are much nicer and prefer them. But at the end of the day, no matter what the cover looks like, the words are the same. At least you hope the words are the same and no one has redacted things and changed things. But overall, I would give this, my top 10 spot because it's up there. I'd highly recommend it. So yeah, if you're interested in Stephen King, I don't think this is the best place to start, but it is a good place. So I'd recommend this. Coming in at number 9, we have Dracula by Bram Stoker. So this edition is a pocket edition from Waterstones in the UK. So as you can see, it's got a nice gold cover, a nice little front cover, a back cover as well with a ship. The book itself is tiny compared to your average size book because again, it's a pocket edition. But the book has actually gold plate pages, and every page, is quite packed with the writing. So this is a fantastic edition. It's one of my, one of my favorites. But again, the story itself is on another level. I think classic literature is classics for a reason, and I think Bram Stoker with Dracula, it stood the test of time, and it's obvious why. If you know Dracula, I still think this novel offers a lot of information that you wouldn't have got through any of the adaptations, whether they be the more classic or the more recent. That's my kind of view on most things. You can't really beat a good book. So Dracula itself is about... Does it really need an explanation? I guess it does, but it's about a vampire, as you can Count Dracula. But what's one thing that I found very interesting about the novel, which I didn't really think about before I actually read this, which I read this late last year, was that Dracula, I've always thought of him as kind of a big physical menace. You always see them in the adaptation of the vampires, well, in all adaptations that are kind of based off of Dracula, not just in media but also within other books. Vampires are always physically overpowering, physically strong. They can take on whoever they want, and that's one thing that gives them fear, gives them scariness. But Dracula, I kind of found, I was surprised when I went into this that he was more psychologically terrifying. He was more about tricks of the mind and being able to be manipulative and being able to kind of work behind the scenes to get what he wants. Of course, he can do the the standard vampire things, and he does have those abilities, but even then he does have some more kind of depth to him in this book than I quite realised. So again, it would be another recommendation. I'm not the biggest fan of the ending of this book. I thought it could have been better. I don't want to say it was rushed. It kind of felt rushed, but not at the same time, which is a weird way to describe it. But I still think it is a fantastic read and highly recommended for anyone who likes classic books, for anyone who just wants a new read. And again, it's a classic for a reason, so I'd highly recommend reading Dracula, which is my number 9. At number 8, we have Changes by Jim Butcher, which is, I think, number 12 or 13 in the Dresden Files series, which is a series following Harry Dresden, as you can see him on the cover, who is a private investigator and a wizard who lives in Chicago in modern day. I say modern day, it starts in the early 2000s and up until Battlegrounds comes to 2020, modern day. But basically, Changes is just, as it says on the tin, it changes everything about the Dresden Files stories. I think from the start, Dresden Files is a bit weak. So if you haven't read this, I think the first few can be quite difficult, but once you get into the flow of them, it is just non-stop. And then when it gets to Changes, it just ups the level, which is quite incredible considering this book, you have about 10 previous books and every book adds upon the next. And then this one adds 10 times. And then it goes on to the next ones and the next ones. And again, they grow even further. And I could have chosen quite a few of the Dresden File books, but I decided with Changes because, again, I think it's the most influential, but it's also my favourite of the series, and that's why it's up here. It's one of those books, one of the rare occasions where I read it in a couple of sittings, which I read a lot, but I don't normally read, beyond 50 to 100 pages in a single sitting. So considering I read, 540 pages in a single, or 1 or 2 settings, I think is testament to the amazingness of this book, and I'd highly recommend it. If you haven't read the Dresden Files, please do. It's a fantastic series. If you haven't got to Changes yet, again, please keep going and get in there because it's just fantastic. As you can probably see with this one and the previous ones, I'm not going to go into too much detail about any of these books because I don't want too many spoilers, but again, I want there to be recommendations. So again, Dresden File Changes comes in at number 8. And coming in at number 7, we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is a fantastic edition from Waterstones. Again, it's one of their special classics. As you can see, there's a bit of a heart on the front cover there. It's a hardback of sorts, but it's not like your traditional hardback, which I don't actually like. The big ones are quite heavy to hold, but this is kind of more of a normal size paperback style, but in a hardback. And again, it's got a fantastic introduction. Just have a look at that. It's lovely, and it's got the page count and everything. It's just so fantastic. But less about this edition of the book and more about the story, and it is just fantastic. The fact that Mary Shelley, I believe, I'm probably hopefully not going to be corrected wrong on this, I believe she wrote this when she was 18, which is absolutely incredible. I don't think you could give me 100 years on this earth and I could write anything a fraction as good as this book. I think one of the things I really like about classics, and it goes with Dracula, Frankenstein, and some more that are coming up, is the greats of the late 19th, the early of late 20th century. Not the late 20th, only the early 20th and late 19th. They are fantastic at what they do, and not back then. You were the best of the best if you wanted to be published, and it's very clear that Mary Shelley was the best of the best at what she did. And one of the things that I really enjoy about classic books and why I like things like Frankenstein is that when I read, I really struggle to visualize what I'm reading. I'm one of those people who can't really see what the words are portraying. I'm quite good at scenery, quite good at locations, but people and things like that, I'm just awful. So I don't really get the full experience that some readers do. However, with the way that Mary Shelley writes in this, I can visualize everything, and it's fantastic. It blew me away the first time I read this because I thought I would never be able to experience a book like a real reader, in quotes. But Frankenstein did that for me, and I was very, very, very happy about that. But the story itself it's not what you expect. I think again, it goes the same with Dracula. If you consume Frankenstein and other medias, you would have maybe preconceived notions of what the story is and how characters act, but it's not. It's different. It is very different. Like obviously, Dr. Frankenstein and his monster are very different characters, and I think the monster itself is a fascinating character. I really do. I think it's one of those books where, you know, you can empathize with all the characters. You love to hate and hate to love some of them. But I think, again, it's just one of those books that you need to read once in your life. It will, you know, it might not change everything, but it's definitely one book that should, you know, if it's not on your bookcase, at least it should be in your mind. So again, I'd definitely recommend this. So yeah, Frankenstein. And coming in at number 6, we have I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Again, this is Sci-fi Masterworks editions. I picked this up in Waterstones. It's an interesting cover. It's not the best this edition, but you know, again, it doesn't really matter. Saying doesn't matter as an avid book collector. Obviously, an edition matters to me anyway. But this, you know, this one again, the words are the same as what you need, so it doesn't matter what the edition is. It's just a fantastic book. You know, what is there to say? If you've only seen the Will Smith movie, please don't take that as any sort of gospel on this book. It's completely different. And I think the kind of the twist at the end of this book, which I won't say for spoiler's sake, is definitely one to think about. And it's one that you think about for a while. It's a really interesting way to perceive, you know, how we as individuals, when we go through life, our viewpoint can be very different to other people's viewpoints on who's in the right and who's in the wrong. And based on circumstances, that can change. And I think that's really, really, really interesting. So the story, anyway, as a brief synopsis, follows an individual, Robert Neville, just had to remind myself, Robert Neville, as he lives alone in the apocalypse. So the world has turned to vampires, which isn't much of a spoilers when you look at the teeth of the lovely chap on the front there. The world has turned into vampires, and he's the last human, or at least the last human that he knows of. So the story is him surviving on his own in that apocalyptic world. So again, post-apocalyptic is one of my favorite genres, and this one just kind of takes that, spins it, puts it on its own, and it is, you know, it's one of those early, it's a classic, it's one of those early, what was it, from like the 50s, I believe. So again, it was one of the first of its time, and I think you can see a lot of inspiration in different authors taken from this. Even on the back, you've got Stephen King, you know, he's a big fan of this as well. So yeah, I definitely recommend this. If you've only seen I Am Legend through the film, please don't think that is how it's supposed to be. I Am Legend, the book, fantastic, quick read as well. So if you need a quick classic read, then please go with this. And yeah, it's got a great twist at the end, which I think you know, turns this book from a 4 out of 5 to a 5 out of 5. So highly recommend I Am Legend. Coming in at number 5, we have Stephen King, The Mist. Again, I seem to be kind of comparing these to a lot of the adaptations, but I think, you know, especially with King, his, you know, adaptations of all his books almost. The Mist, I think, is a fantastic adaptation, but the book is better, in my opinion, apart from the ending. The ending of the movie is better to the book. Hopefully that's not a controversial take. It's just better, in my opinion. A lot more heart-wrenching. And I think even Stephen King himself has expressed that the ending of the movie is better than the book. But forgetting about the movie, we're here on BookTube, so let's concentrate on some books. So the story basically revolves around a small town. I believe it's in Maine. Probably is. Stephen King, so probably Maine. And it basically revolves around a group of individuals from the town who get stuck in a grocery store as this mist rolls in. You know, nothing wrong with mist, apart from when they notice that there's something in the mist. And what the real interesting thing about this book is, you know, even though there's monsters within the fog and the mist, there's monsters within all of us. And I think it highlights that fantastically well through the character development that King is well known for. So there's monsters inside and outside that store. So if you are interested in, you know, a Stephen King book, this is actually, I'd recommend it as a first time reader. It's not a long one, as you can see. It's only 170 pages, and you get a lot of good content there for yeah, great story. And I just will add that this is the Hodder edition. The cover of one of the Hodder editions I was saying about or talking about earlier, and as you can see, it's fantastic. You know, what a fantastic cover. And that's one that I found, you know, what made me buy this book originally was the cover. And yeah, I'd highly recommend it. If you can get hold of the Hodder editions, then, you know, do, because they are fantastic. Okay, so we are coming into the top 5. Next we have number 4, which is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And it is a book I've only read this year. So it wasn't one that I read too long ago, but it's one I have not forgotten about, which what can you ask for when it comes to the book? One that you can't think about. If you've read this book, you probably, you know the reason why you can't stop thinking about it. And there is a character in here called the Judge, who is absolutely horrendous. He's an absolutely heinous character, but he is interesting to read. From a reader's point of view, it's fascinating to read, even though it is, you're reading despicable, heinous acts. But this book is basically based on the character called the Kid, and his journey, slash adventure through the Old West and down. So he starts in Texas and goes down into Mexico and then goes back up, and he joins a gang. And this gang, let's just say they're not the nicest of individuals, and they go around doing heinous things. And it just ends with the journey, and the ending is one that I haven't been able to forget about for a long time. Probably pretty much is kind of disturbing, but it's also very interesting from a reading point of view. Cormac McCarthy, if you haven't read him, is an interesting author. Doesn't particularly like grammar, which who does? We do like grammar, but not in this book. We don't. So there's no, there's very little. There's no like quotation marks, no speech marks. There's no very little commas. There's a few, there's full stops and new lines, and that's about it, which can be very difficult to get into, especially if you've been reading one of these classics that I talked about before. It can be very difficult to kind of switch from one of those to this, but if you can push through, I highly recommend this book. It's absolutely fantastic. It's not for the light-hearted. It's very, there's got some very serious and very horrible topics, but if you can, if you can read through that, I think it's worth reading. It's a great book, and as you can see, I think this is a fantastic cover. Really illustrates the book. I got to pick this one up in Waterstones, but I think Blood Meridian, is only one of three that I've noticed. I've got the other one upstairs, which is No Country for Old Men, and also The Road. I don't own that one, but they're all in this similar sort of edition, which, as a book collector, I'm definitely going to get The Road to add to my collection. But yeah, that's Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Really recommend, but, you've been warned. And now going on to number 3, which is Stephen Erickson's Memories of Ice, which is the third book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, which is quickly becoming my favourite series of all time. And looking back at the previous books, you wouldn't actually tell that I'm a massive fantasy reader. And I think out of all the fantasy, Malazan is at the top. It is brilliant. It's it's deep. It's got a lot of characters. It's got a lot of storylines. It can be confusing at times, but I don't think you should let that put you off. I've heard some people talk about Malazan as if it takes 3 or 4 books to understand what's going on, which I don't agree. I think if you've read fantasy before, or you've been kind of included in the fantasy sort of genre, you grew up, watch things like Lord of the Rings, or playing games like World of Warcraft, and you've kept up with the story and the lore in those sort of medias, I think this wouldn't be too far out to understand. But I think it's just next level to any sort of fantasy I've read before. I think every book is about 1,200 pages, so they are big reads and they're big commitments, but they're worth it. The characters are fantastic, stories are great, the action is insane, and that's actually why I picked Memories of Ice, the third one, because I've read up to Reaper's Gale, which I believe is 7th, but nothing has really suppressed Memories of Ice. Not to spoil it too much, because I know it's the third in the series, so you don't want the first and second to be spoiled, but it is just it's just insane. It's just crazy what goes on in this book. There's a massive siege that lasts for hundreds of pages, and that siege is so well done and so well written that it's really hard to put down. So if you like kind of like sieges, fighting, wars, all that sort of thing, you'll find it here, but you'll also find so much more. That's just very, very surface level analysis of this. But yeah, I can't really go into too much detail for the characters that you follow, because there are so many. And this is just, for information, is that the first book, the characters from the first book show up in this book again. The characters from the second book don't show up in this book, well, some of them do. But yeah, I'd highly recommend this. I think the first book is good if you haven't read Malazan. Second book is fantastic as well, but Memories of Ice just blows them all out of the water. So again, I'd highly recommend the Malazan book. And if you could at least get to book 3, then I think you'll be happy if you're a fantasy fan. So yeah, that's number 3, Stephen Erickson, Memories of Ice. Coming in at number 2, we have The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. As you can see, what a fantastic cover this is. I've got a few of these, classic Victorian-esque books from like Arthur Conan Doyle and Jules Verne and people like that. And I just think that's, it's great. It's a fantastic size to, to read and take on the go, but it's also a brilliant cover. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, if you're not aware of who he is the author of Sherlock Holmes. So that's why you probably have heard of him before. But The Lost World is one of his other books, and it is basically set around some, Victorian explorers who have found a plateau that has never been discovered before, at least by humans, and it is untouched from the rest of the world. So nothing has gone up and nothing has come down from this plateau. So, it's not a spoiler, but as you can see, there are dinosaurs and there are other things on this plateau. And I think one of the things that I really like about this book and why it comes number 2 is, again, the classic way of writing. Some people don't like it, but I do. I find it very immersive. I find it very engrossing. I find it really interesting. I think it makes you want to know more, makes you feel immersed, makes you feel like you're there. I think specifically with this book, the idea of exploration, the idea of exploring a world undiscovered is something that goes on in fantasy a lot of the time. It's not something that really goes on, in the real world, unless you go back to more historic fiction, because in today's world, everywhere has been discovered. Everyone knows everything about the land. There's arguments for the sea, we still got to explore that, and underground, but for the actual world, we've explored everywhere. But back in this time, things still needed to be explored, things still need to be discovered, and I think this story is a fantastic way to portray that. So this story follows one individual called Ed Malone, which I'm just having to read on the back because I am terrible with names, who is a journalist. Apparently, I can't remember that exactly, but the character I do remember is Professor Challenger. He is the kind of like the secondary character, but he's the the kind of stereotypical strongman Victorian who's goes out on all these adventures, and I think it's just a fantastic read. It's really interesting. You've got dinosaurs, you have other things that I don't want to spoil it, and you have a fantastic atmosphere when they get up there. But it's also it's the journey there, it's the journey home, and it's the exploration while they're there. So I'd highly recommend this book. It's it is really great. So yeah, that's The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, not to be confused with the Lost World Jurassic Park books. And number 1, so this is my favourite book of all time, and it has been my favourite book for about 6 years now. Nothing has managed to top it, and I don't think anything will. I think it will have to take an absolutely insane, incredible book to top this. So my number 1 is The Lonesome Dove by Larry McNulty. So as I said in at the beginning of the video, I think your favourite book can actually depend on where you are in life. So you might read a book one year and you might read the same book the next year, and it might not be the same because of where you are in your life. So Lonesome Dove was in a time where, I don't know, I wasn't reading too much. I felt a bit lost, and I got involved in this book after I went on Reddit, and I asked for book suggestions of Westerns, because Westerns are, it's up there with one of my favourite genres, and someone recommended Lonesome Dove. Never heard of it before, but I thought it'd be really interesting to see what it was about. And as you can tell, it is a massive book. I think it goes up to, this edition is about 900 pages. I think when I read it previously on the Kindle, it was about 1,000. But it's basically a journey of some ex-Texas Rangers who go on a cattle drive from Texas up to Montana, with about 2,000-3,000 cattle, and it's their journey from Texas to Montana that you watch. And I think it is one of those books where it is, the journey, it's about the journey, not the destination, even though I think this has a fantastic ending. And it's one that, I still think about from now and again. And the characters themselves are great. You've got Gus and you've got Woodrow, who are the two, I'd say, main characters, but you've also got point of view chapters from different individuals. So yeah, I think if you're looking for a Western, you have to read this. If you're looking for an adventure, you have to read this. I think even if you're a big fantasy fan, and that big sort of quest adventure, I think this would be up your alley as well. Again, very well written, and it's just one of those books that I'm gonna have to read again, before I die, hopefully. But again, what I was saying earlier about time in your life, when I got this book originally, I remember one day after work, I had to go catch the bus, and the bus was about 30 minutes away. So I decided to go get some food before he went and got the bus. And then I started reading this, and then the next thing I remember was the cleaning lady asking me to leave the food court because I had been there for about 4 or 5 hours, completely missed all my buses, but it was worth it because I was so engrossed in this. I genuinely just lost track of time, and I think that in itself is a good good endorsement of any sort of book. But again, cowboys, going on a long journey with their friends, and it's the development of each of the characters, and they change what they are and who they are, and you're just following as they overcome adversity in many different forms. So again, I'd highly recommend The Lonesome Dove. Yeah, and that's number 1 in my favorite books. So that's my top 10. I thought I'd have very quickly a few honorable mentions just to make sure that I kind of get the books that almost made it but didn't quite make it onto the list. So we have firstly The Winter King by Bernard Cornwell. This is part of a trilogy of the Warlord Chronicles. Again, I have to read them off the front of the book because I keep forgetting. But this is basically the story of King Arthur, or at least a version of the story that's kind of historically accurate, in brackets, but it's not based on, it's based on myths, but it's not actual real magic or anything. It's realism, to as realistic as we can make it. But Bernard Cornwell is a fantastic author. I've also got his Last Kingdom series, which I think is amazing. He likes to write in first person, and it's normally, from the books I've read of him anyway, it's normally a storyteller who was talking about their past adventures. So this one we follow Derville as he basically meets King Arthur, and is there throughout the trilogy with King Arthur, building his Knights of the Round Table, his Camelot, and things like that. So this is the first book, and I thought it was fantastic. I've read the second book, again, think it's amazing, and I'm going to be reading the third book hopefully soon. So again, I'd recommend this, Bernard Cornwell, The Winter King. So then the next kind of honourable mention is H.P. Lovecraft. Again, this is a great edition, a 3D cover. So this one is The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Tales. So specifically, The Call of Cthulhu. I really enjoyed reading that. I think Lovecraft in general, his stories. Thank you for all my receipts, to make sure to remember, where I bought them. It's also vintage glasses in there, which I haven't actually taken off, which, is to help you see this lovely 3D cover. But yeah, Lovecraft is a great author. I think his prose can be a bit difficult, but the concepts, that kind of cosmic horror is fascinating, and, is one that, keep going back to Lovecraft. So specifically The Call of Cthulhu, but there are other stories in here and other stories by Lovecraft that I do really enjoy. So yeah, I'd recommend picking up some Lovecraft if you can. It's not the easiest to read, but if you can get through it, then it's definitely great. And then lastly, just another sci-fi book is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. So this is the first book in the Red Rising series. I believe there are 5 currently out and a 6th on the way, or there might be 6 out now, I'm not entirely sure. I've only read the first 3, so the first trilogy. But Red Rising was actually one of those rare occurrences where I sat down and read a book in one sitting, which to some of you on here is probably, an everyday occurrence, nothing exciting, but for me, that was, a complete achievement and triumph, and it's testament to Pierce Brown, that, he kept me engaged and wanting to know more without getting up. So again, it's a first person narrative. It follows a character on Mars who is a red, so they have kind of a colour scheme, here with the individuals in the different groups. You've got the reds, who are kind of like the workers, and you have the golds, who are like, the ones in charge, and there's different colours throughout that represent different things. But it's basically, as it says, is Red Rising, so, the Reds rising up, and it kind of follows a bit of a Hunger Games style of book, individuals fighting for their, houses, in a way, for their families and different things. And I thought it was just, it was fantastic. It really engages you. It's really well written, and it's a fast-paced book. And the second and third one are just as good. So again, highly recommend Red Rising if you're into sci-fi. And if not, again, I still would recommend this. If you're a fan of Hunger Games and things like that, then I definitely recommend this. So thank you if you've stuck around this long. I'm sure all one of you are very excited. But I appreciate it, and I appreciate you watching my first video. It's probably a bit clunky. I'm probably waffled on and haven't gone into great detail, but here to learn. And if anything, if no one ever even watches these, it's not the end of the world. It'd be nice to keep myself accountable, and at least to keep maybe also a video diary of what my current top 10s are, so next year I can come back and kind of see, has that changed. I doubt number one will be knocked off anytime soon, but never say never. The rest of the list has changed actually quite dramatically, I'd say, in the last 12 months, especially things like Blood Meridian have come on, and I'd never touched them before that. And the same with like things like The Mist and Dresden Files as well. I have read majority of the Dresden Files within the last 2 years, and again, I highly recommend them. As you can probably see, I've got every single one here. They're double layered. So yeah, really big fan of those. But yeah, once again, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. So if you do enjoy, please subscribe, and I'm going to be hopefully posting a video maybe once a week to keep myself accountable. So yeah, if you'd like to join in the journey, please subscribe and watch again. I really appreciate it. Cool. Thank you very much, guys.